A very pleasant good morning to you once again. Welcome to the BCSI's Understanding Data Privacy in Barbados in conjunction with our partner, Data Privacy and Management Advisory Services, Mr. Stephen Williams. BCSI welcomes you to our week of activities. This discussion is our third discussion for the week under the theme Moving from Possibilities to Realities. And we are certainly very pleased to welcome Mr. Williams to facilitate today's discussion. As we are all aware, data privacy is very important, and with the advent of technology and social media and everything going online, persons are more and more conscious of protecting their data and protecting their information. And things as simple as their date of birth and their names and their addresses. We have certainly become very more acutely aware of data privacy. But what really is data privacy? Why is it important? What are the laws that govern data privacy? What are fair information practices? What are some of the challenges that businesses will have when using data? This and more Mr. Williams will seek to unpack for us as we delve into today's conversation. Mr. Williams is a data privacy specialist, and we know that he is more than capable of tackling this conversation. Mr. Williams will make his presentation, after which we will welcome any questions or comments from the audience. We certainly thank you for joining, and we look forward to engaging you after his presentation and certainly for the rest of this week's activities. Without further ado, I wish to invite Mr. Williams to make his presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This presentation, I don't want it to be a presentation. This is, although you're seeing my screen, I want this more to be an interactive session. One, to gauge a couple of things. Yes, we would use it as a kind of a discussion point to some issues such as data subject rights and then rules of processing in terms of processing data, and we get into some terms. This is part of my training, one of my training modules, or I guess my training slides. So I'm just going to use it as a guide. So today isn't about training, but more part of an interactive discussion where I lead the discussion in helping, I guess, you attendees to basically be on the same page, to actually have a platform of which you could though go back and share the ideas and share the possibilities of how your organization could benefit from having a data privacy program in place, or even just getting trained. So this is not a training video. I don't think that the idea behind this platform today is training, but to actually whet your guys' appetite in relation to the subject in itself. So this part of this is, or at least what you're seeing on the screen, is data business management, or for business managers, introduction to data privacy practices. So this is where the discussion is taken from. So just a little bit about myself. I've been involved in technology for over 25 years now. Started this consultancy practice about, I would say in earnest, about 3-4 years ago, after Chad Blackman, now former Ambassador Chad Blackman, disclosed that the European Union was going to basically looking to ferment something called the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations for the entire Europe. And I know that where Europe goes, the world kind of follows. And it's in that framework that I started to get involved from the perspective of data privacy more and data protection. I since then use all my years of technology training for the market and the businesses that I've been associated with, and focused on cybersecurity and data privacy, becoming a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer in April 2021, and then follow up with Certified Data Protection Officer, which is really privacy. The words are used interchangeably, unfortunately, but be that as it may, it's really data privacy that I've been certified in. I think I followed up in August 2021. And since then, up to this January this year, I've been the former IT consultant for the Law Review Commission for their cybercrime bill. So the government, at some point within the next year or two, is it's most likely going to repeal the Computer Misuse Act. So basically, they have done a review and realized that, it's losing its compliance and relevance into this fast-moving technology, I guess, era, and has replaced it with a more modernized and up-to-date bill, proposed cybercrime bill, which is a little bit more comprehensive. And I've played to my mind, a part of that experience and a part of that upcoming law that hopefully we will be able to see sooner rather than later. So with that said, just a loose agenda. So don't really study this agenda too much. I said this was part of a bigger discussion and a bigger training program, where we're going to keep some of the same principles and some of the same energy going in relation to some of the topics or the subjects that we're going to get to this morning. But so basically, it's going to set the stage of why now, why is it critical, why is it important, and going forward from there, begin to actually kind of dissect the importance of how it relates to businesses in Barbados and across the Caribbean. So I'm cognizant of when you have these programs online that you can really be talking to anyone across the world. And right now, the Caribbean is becoming more than one singular place. So this discussion applies to anyone across the Caribbean, actually, as you're going to see in a minute. So setting the stage, the new business reality. So we can look in terms of what is this new reality that we're dealing with and grappling with. All right, and then we're going to follow on with the topic and why now and the applicability to the region, and then follow up in terms of some of the actual jargon associated with it, because you kind of, people kind of get lost when you hear people talk about the use of certain words and in constructs to make an argument, and then you would get lost because they use jargon, they use terms that you might not necessarily understand. So the idea is to ensure that we all understand what we say when we say it, especially in terms of data privacy, because it can easily be misled if you don't understand some of the terms. So we can look at that in terms of setting the stage, and we can take it from there. The new business reality. So, I don't have to let you guys know that, the Caribbean faces an extraordinary situation. Whether you have a large business, and you can see the large businesses have been in the press, and we are facing a situation where our information and our systems are constantly under attack. If you think about it, I say this, and I make no bones about it, that we spend millions of dollars in physical defense, defending our shores, defending our borders, but we are more likely to get a cyber attack against critical infrastructure such as water, electricity, or the electric company, critical government infrastructure such as the new ID card systems. Those systems are more likely to get attacked than Barbados ever get physically attacked or invaded by a third-party country. So we wouldn't, do we have to worry about a cyber threat a physical terrorist threat where some person blows up, the parliament building, or God forbid, the cabinet office? Hardly likely. And I can say that looking at the risk assessment associated with it. Our physical infrastructure and our country is less of a terrorist threat, but yet we spend millions of dollars. But what I can say for certain, because I see it every day, any person that manages something called a firewall or manages a business's defense in terms of looking at antivirus, look at the basic constructs of protecting the small business, we see that we are constantly under threat from external actors and some local ones too. And what that is doing is putting pressure on business owners and government alike, even people at home, to protect their rights and freedoms, because we all have a right and freedom to engage in being a digital citizen or being a digital corporation, right? But our businesses face the risks that come from technology in an unprecedented way, right? And these include human error, unfortunately, that can lead to breaches and sometimes malicious attacks. So that's the reality that we face right now. And it is equally important to understand that, there's a saying that makes it make sense, which is, in the gold rush in, I think, the early 1900s, right? It was called the gold rush because gold at the time was what was making bank, was what the then reality of the globe and the world was run on, which is the gold standard. But right now, if you ask and then quickly after that came oil, and oil became the new gold rush. And now it's data. How people collect data, right? How they basically collate it and manipulate it is the new gold and oil rush. And in so doing, we don't even realize to our own detriment how that impacts how we now have value in terms of ourselves, in terms of our systems, or people. That information has value. And unfortunately, while it may have value in one aspect, those actors who collect the data can use it back on us in a way that, can be a national security issue, and at least at the bare minimum, make our lives very, very miserable on a day. So take, for example, a miserable thing, right, would be credit card theft, where your credit card is compromised. And, basically that type of fraud can make your life very, very miserable. On the upper end, people who basically collate and capture data now in such a way that they use it for nefarious activity, can use you as a target, or can use groups of colleagues or groups of people in the country as targets for other types of nefarious activity and actions that can then even lead to more consequences. So the new business reality is such that we have to be mindful of the fact that data has very impactful and very strategic importance for those people overseas, but it should be equally important to us as well. So the topic of why now, in the wake of recent high-profile data breaches in Barbados, and there were some after this, but as I said, this presentation was done, prepared a little while ago. But we look at Anson McCall, Simpson Motors, and then even government, right? And we were a little close to this year, I think, your post-data breach, all brings the topic to relevance. Anson McCall was probably, for us, the biggest one, because Anson McCall reaches across not just one company, but a group of companies, and it reached from Trinidad right down to Barbados, and then for large periods of time, the systems were down, unavailable, and then in itself, that caused massive downtime and therefore money. So therefore, it has real monetary implications for business. And for small business who have data breaches, or who have a situation where their systems are locked up and they have to pay a ransomware, or are they faced with a ransomware situation where they cannot get the use of their computer systems, right? It can cripple a business for extended periods of time, and that could sometimes mean the life of the business itself. All right, so these high-profile companies don't escape it either, and it's not just high-profile companies that face this threat, right? Aeropost is not a large company in Barbados, but they are part of a network. So even though you may be a small company, you might be part of a larger network, even if it's not physically connected, but you may have a relationship with a larger company who depend on you to deliver services locally. So therefore, data is now borderless, meaning that, the activities of data doesn't necessarily reside in Barbados or in one network or in one PC alone. Data is very, very fluid. Email is the first example of the fluidity of data, because you can take up a database, email it now, or you can take up a segment of a data set, email it, send it anywhere. All right, you can use different methods, from Dropbox to big file to send large volumes of data. Data is very, very fluid in 2022, and it's going to get more so. All right, so even our regulations are taking stronger interest. That's why, in terms of data privacy breaches that affect large volumes of data, especially with financial services. So financial services is the one that has paid the most attention to data privacy, and that's because of something called AML, anti-money laundering regulations. And for financial institutions, this topic is nothing new, and it's understandably so, because there's a saying as well, especially in I guess Western times, or the early or late 1900s, people rob banks because that's where the money is. Financial institutions, that's still where the money is, but no, it's just not physically money, it's actually data. All right, so questions like, have you taken necessary steps to ensure data privacy by design? And that's an interesting thing. A lot of times we go and put in these systems in operation, so therefore you get some person, like I see my friend Shannon online here, so you go and basically have Shannon commission a snazzy piece of software, and he builds it according to specifications. But if you think about it, when does data privacy come into play? Before Shannon even writes a first line of code, because what should happen at that point is a discussion in terms of who should have access to that data, where is the data going to be stored. All these are part, and guys, I'm not saying anything that's not part of our law. Everything that I've said is in our law. This whole presentation done for the Barbados Workers Union speaks to our law in itself. So therefore, when you bring in a developer or you decide to solicit or subcontract or even buy off-the-shelf software, something that you can easily adapt and use in your organization, the issue of data privacy should come in to the early discussion where you're looking to buy into software or software solutions. So is it applicable only in Barbados? No. It's applicable all over the Caribbean. And that's why I said in this presentation, there's nothing that I'm saying that isn't applicable or have some relevance to other Caribbean countries. I'm not going to go through all, but I just want to pick up one or two. If you can look at Bahamas, the Privacy of Information Act in 2003. So as far back as 2003, our act is 2019. But in 2003, these guys in the Bahamas realized that data is of critical importance to the national development and security of the Bahamas. And if you know the Bahamas, they are known for their financial services. And by extension, they know the protection of information is critical to their being in business and their economy. So these guys up in 2003, they got it, they got it up early and going, even down to St. Vincent in 2003 as well. So St. Vincent knew, and if you cast your mind back to St. Vincent, they were known for online gambling. And then a lot of times the governments across the world wanted the data associated with who is gambling using St. Vincent servers and St. Vincent infrastructure to register companies, to actually provide digital and online services. So St. Vincent said, you know what, we're gonna have a law that speaks to international compliance to one, protect ourselves, because not having a law is no excuse for not being able to be compliant actually in modern times. So because you don't have a law, that means that you can't be compliant or you shouldn't be compliant. That's equivalent of ignorance is no excuse to the law. So when they knew where they were going and where their economy can possibly go, in 2003, St. Vincent decided that, data privacy is something that they want to actually have as part of their legislative framework for the country. Why are data privacy acts important? The long and short of it is a human right. The European human rights articles basically state, section 12, everyone has the right to have their rights respected in terms of personal and family life, his home and correspondence. So meaning that an individual has a certain set of rights, such as the right to food, the right to shelter, the basic certain health services. And what they're saying in this modern times, that the rights and freedoms of a person's private life has to be respected. All right, it's just a strike a balance between the rights of an individual in terms of their privacy and also the ability for organizations to execute on their mandate to be a good cooperation, right? And to be and the benefit of that cooperation. So basically, it's a law specific governing organizations and how they use information. So example, the National Petroleum Corporation has thousands and thousands of records, thousands and thousands of records these guys have. So how they treat to that information, right, in terms of how it's protected, stored, used, who accesses it, what rights do individuals have, we're going to get into in a minute, but just use them as an example because the cliche would be to use a bank or someplace like that. But as I said, banks already have certain set of policies in place to operate, such as anti-money laundering, and there is an aspect of data privacy and anti-money laundering, right? Therefore, the purpose of data protection is to make sure that personally identifiable information, PII, isn't being processed without the knowledge and consent of the individual. And that's critically important in today's context. The Barbados context is an organization that feels it has a legitimate interest to process your data, sometimes does it without your consent. And here's the bugbear for me. Businesses go about processing data, but has anyone within the organization, especially compliance, and sometimes businesses do not have a compliance department. So therefore, compliance falls, unfortunately, to the general manager who has 4 billion things to do, or the CEO of a small and medium-sized business. These organizations go about collecting personal identifiable information without the consent of the individual. And consent is funny because you may have consent in one aspect. For example, I'd like to use this example going back to the days of COVID. And the example I use to give when I train people is that I remember that there was a hotel in Barbados who offered a lottery. I think there's the individuals that were part of the lottery were their employees. And they basically said, for all those who present their vaccination cards, they were entered into a lottery to have the chance to win this $500 in this pot. Just bring your card. Now, one can say if they present the card, it's consent to store and process data with their employees. However, and they basically said, for all those who present their vaccination cards, they were entered into a lottery. Sorry, I was hearing my voice there. Yeah, right. So when they present this card, they went into the lottery. But the question then comes up. If all that was communicated to the employee, and this is where consent gets tricky, if all that was communicated to the employee that you entered into the lottery, and then they take that information and determine if an employee can work or not going forward. So if you present your card and you're vaccinated, but all of a sudden you're scheduled 5 days a week to work as per usual, and the person did not present their card or was not vaccinated, right, didn't get scheduled for work, or he gets less opportunity to work, that's a data privacy violation. Because in a lot of aspects, he can even take it to the Employers' Rights Tribunal, because upon agreement to work, that was now a condition of employment. So this is where part of my discussion is going to look at HR and the impact that HR has on data privacy. Because consent would have said, right, yes, you may use my information to enter into this lottery that I want to participate in, but I did not give you consent to use it in such a way that it fractures my rights and freedoms. So there's a very direct link between data privacy and HR that I would want those people who have a hand in HR to basically, take note of that. All right, law and compliance. So basically, is this the first, data privacy law? No. Right, what laws do we have to speak about in terms of data protection? In the Barbados Electronic Transactions Act, section 22, page 17, you can take a look at it. Speak also to data privacy under Electronic Transactions Act. All that has happened is that we've now taken a more holistic and comprehensive approach to data privacy. But if you were transferring data around Barbados or transferring it between systems, which is the electronic transactions part, the data privacy did apply to this act as well. So we did have, since 2001, some aspect of data privacy, but it was kind of wrapped up or subsumed into a bigger act. And now all the government has sought to do later is to pull it out and have a more structured approach to what you should look to do in terms of compliance, right? So even down to the Computer Misuse Act, which is 2005, section 12A and section 13C, speak to aspects of data privacy. And of course, the entire act of 2019 is data protection, data privacy as well. And in 2021, there's something called the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And that too speaks to aspects of data privacy. So in terms of processing your data as it refers to credit rating. So therefore, we know these organizations know that keep your information, determine if you can get a sofa, because you might owe some money on water and you can't get a sofa on credit. No, all these organizations know, right, have to speak to how they protect the rights and freedoms of individuals and how they protect data, right, in their systems. All right, so just a couple of key terms, right? Data privacy is the protection of personal information from those who would seek to have access to it, and the ability of those individuals to determine who can access their personal information. So we went over that already, so I'm not gonna go over it again. Long and short of it is, data privacy is basically all those functions and processes that seek to give individuals rights in terms of who has their data, and for organizations to understand how they can process that data. All right, personal data means information concerning or relating to a living person. So this is the thing, it's a living person. So going back to my National Petroleum Corporation example again, they may have 200,000 records, for example. I don't know how many records the National Petroleum Corporation has, but people would have died, and by extension, they may have 300,000 records. So the data privacy principles and law only applies to those people who are living. So the other 100,000, right, does not have the protection under the act, right? Processing refers to any operation or set of operations performed on personal data. So long and short of it is, if you're storing data, so even if you just copy the data and put it on a computer, that's called processing. the law does not specifically state what processing is, because even having data stored on a computer that you're doing absolutely nothing with, it is still considered processing. It may be more referred to as storing, but it's still under the law considered processing, right? So retrieval, using, combining, erasing, destroying can involve automated or manual operations, yes. And the word manual, and people might be going, oh, so this is a computer thing. No, 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 no. The law identifies automated systems, meaning digital, but it also protects information on paper as well. And that's where it gets even trickier, because you may have a situation where, for example, a doctor's office who hasn't really come up to speed. You may have information going back years in paper, and a patient can come to you and say, Doc, under Data Protection Act, I want access to all of my patient records. And then he has to go back and look through all those dusty files and pull it back, because the law doesn't state only those who have computer systems. Data is data, information is information in whatever form. So it's not defined a structure to data in terms of it being only electronic. Could be paper-based as well. A data controller, so these are the key terms that people should just bear in mind. A data controller refers to a person, a company, or a body which decides the purpose and methods of processing data. So I like to use local examples because, you know, we're in Barbados. So the organization I like to use for that is, IMARC. Because I have an IMARC card, got some questions, all right? Like, for example, IMARC has points on me. You know, so I have 30 points, and that may be $30. And this is great. But the questions that I would ask, if I could speak to the general manager there, right, is who has access to this data? Do you share my data with other organizations within IMARC's conglomerate, because they're part of a larger group of companies, which I can't remember right now. But, you know, do they share data outside IMARC to their group of companies? So if you have some person that says, no, we don't. Well, can I see the policy that states that? Because any company that does not have a written policy on something and goes, we don't do that, means that even though they say something, your job as an individual, as a data subject, is to see the policy on it. Because the policy may state, we don't do it, but under these conditions, we might. So they generally don't. So therefore, data subjects, such as yourself, because you may be representing companies, but you're also data subjects too, right? Is to always ask for a company's data privacy policy, all right? Data processor refers to a person, company, or body which processes personal data on behalf of a data controller. So a good example of that would be one of my companies, right, who host email websites on behalf of other businesses. So we'd be a data processor. For example, if some person hosts information on behalf of government in terms of their servers, so the government may decide to outsource some servers to another third party to supplement or augment the skills and resources that they have internally, that individual or company will be considered data processor. And they too fall under certain requirements under the Data Protection Act. Sensitive personal data, which is critical because this is the one where, you know, in the past, you know, people might have gotten in trouble for, all right? So we have to pay particular attention to this one, because sensitive personal data means personal data consists of information, right, on data subjects that pertains to racial or ethnic origin. Now, under the Data Protection Act, I understand that churches can have a database on its members, but churches will be the last place you expect to see cybersecurity. And whereas they are protected to gather this information under the act, I think churches have some level of understanding, meaning that they can. A lot of times churches don't realize that they have an obligation to protect as well. So whereas a church can collect racial or ethnic information, which falls under like a membership to trade union or organization, which is understandable because a church's business is about the community. What the law does not state is that because you are a church or a member of a trade union, okay, it doesn't mean that you should not put these protections in place. Because whereas a business organization, institution, like say NPC, must put certain things in place because the law specifically states it. The law does not state that because you're a trade union or you're a church that you don't have to. It just says that you can. But saying that you can do something does not negate the responsibility an organization has to protect the rights and freedoms of those individuals who entrust you with data. Okay, so for religious benefits and other beliefs, political opinions and organizations are also protected under the law to collect the information. And all they're saying in this particular context here is that consent does not have to be explicit. So what that means is that you can get a regular consent agreement situation going where you agree to have your information collected. So a political party can state, we're doing a little canvas today in the area. We want to know how many people are affected by the situations of water outage. And you take down that information. They're protected under the law as a political organization that has been accredited or recognized political organizations collecting the information. They don't have to explicitly do it. So what explicit consent means is that if I, Stephen Williams, want to collect this information on who is affected by water outages in a community or village, I have to get a written consent, meaning I have to have a form that states John Brown of X village agrees to have his information collected for the purposes, if he's going to tell me, well, if he's going to say that he's a particular party or X, Y, or Z, so I'm collecting water, but I also want to know if he's supporting the BID. That's wrong, right? Water is all right. But for argument's sake, if I go to do it now, though, right, and I do not get that express consent that I can go back to a judge and say, yes, here's Mr. Brown's agreement on October 5th for me to collect his party information, which is politically affiliated, and information pertaining to his water needs. So a political party can do it, not an individual organization. And if an individual organization goes to do it, they must have explicit consent, meaning that it must be written and documented somewhere. Biometric data. This is what trips up a lot of organizations. Biometric data. Why? Because you can ask potential employers or organizations what cybersecurity or security mechanisms they have for biometric data. You can go biometric data. But if you think about it, I see a lot of employees now using their thumbprint to sign in. Sometimes you go into an organization now and you have to now scan your face, because they want to check you at the door. What is the data policy on that type of situation? Actually, in schools, a lot of schools are putting in CCTV cameras. That's biometric data. Anything you can use people's biographic information and your face, retina eye, or your thumbprint is biometric data. There must be a policy, and it falls under sensitive personal data. So all these cameras that coming up, right? The good questions to ask, how does that now fall under your rights and freedoms being protected? Okay. I'm not gonna go through all data processing principles. So I'm assuming that people that are logged on have represented some business or have a business interest. So I'm not gonna go through in detail these things because in the interest of time, I want this to be a discussion as well. And it's now half an hour been over, right? But the fair and lawful processing. So I give the example of the hotel, right? Was it fair? Right? Was it lawful? It could have been. I'm not saying it didn't, I don't know. But in terms of fair and lawful, it was fair and lawful if all they did was to have a lottery to encourage people to get vaccinated. That was fair and lawful. So any person that gave them the information at that point, it was fair and lawful. They were upfront about what they wanted. If that's all they did, was it lawful? Yes, because one, they disclosed their actions, okay? And they did not seek to basically mislead, right, anyone if that's all they used it for. However, okay, if you know, I remember the COVID vaccine is part of your medical record and history now, and medical records fall under sensitive data, right? Sensitive personal data at that. So if they don't took that information, stored it on HR systems, and they didn't disclose to you that they're storing it, because remember I said up front that even storing data is considered processing. Just the simple act of storing it is called processing, or is deemed processing. It means that if that hotel did not disclose to the employees that they're storing it past the lottery or the use of the lottery, or that they may use it or they will use it to determine who has the most likely ability to work post-COVID or during COVID, that is neither fair nor lawful. Because then the word transparency, right, comes into play. Purpose restrictions. Now, if I agree, using the same example, if I agree to allow you to use my data for the processing of a lottery, and I agree to that, anything beyond that falls in the purpose restriction. The only purpose that that hotel can use that information for is the lottery only, unless they explicitly disclose it will use for other purposes. Adequacy. So adequacy means that for the lottery, all right, you want to only gather the information that's necessary to determine if the lottery is legitimate, meaning that you may want to gather the person's name, you may want to verify their employee, you may want to verify that they're vaccinated. But from the time you start asking how many people in your family have been vaccinated, right? That's nothing to do with the lottery, and it's nothing to do with the individual. So adequacy has to do with the fact that you keep your information collected or being collected restricted for the purposes that you state and the purposes that you need. So if you need to collect this information and it's a legitimate purpose, you're collecting this information, do not now go outside of that scope and collect more information because you think you may need it. And to understand that, a lot of times banks and financial institutions want to collect more information than is required to process an application. It's notorious within the financial institutions because they don't know what they're going to need to know in the future. And what they think is, well, get as much information up front from the individual as possible to save them processing an activity later. No, the law doesn't allow for that. Adequacy means basically just the necessary amount of information to process an application or collect the data for the legitimate purpose that you're using it for. All right. Proceed is simple. You can't keep inaccurate information. From the time as a data subject realized, but wait, pay this bill on the 13th, though, and this is my receipt for it. Are you still showing that I owe you $74? Well, that's not fair. Under the Data Protection Act, you have a right to have your information about who you are accurate. If you go to a doctor and they have not updated their medical file on you, you have the right to have that information accurate as well, right? Retention, right? Basically, you have the right to know how long someone's going to keep your data. Financial records under the Barbados I think the Barbados Financial Act or Currency Act, I'm not sure which act it is, but this act pertaining to BRA and the other organization, the other regulation that deal with financial matters, speak to 7 years. So I know that everyone says, well, I have to keep records for 7 years. You have to keep financial information for 7 years. Keeping people's personal information for 7 years don't fall into play unless there is a legitimate link for the financial information. So there's where compliance departments are critical. And sometimes having good lawyers who have an understanding of the scope is also critical. Because if I state, why do you keep my personal identifiable information? You may say, well, I have to keep your financial records for 7 years. And I go, but what about the information I give you on my medical records state you have to keep it for 7 years? How does my COVID vaccine record that you have on me have to do with my financial records that you have an obligation to report to government? And that can get you in all sorts of messy situations because you have to now go through all your data subject or end user data and start to actually separate and know that data has a shelf life unless you specifically state to them up front, where there's transparency, that you want to keep their data longer than your policy or longer than you've stated that you want to keep it for, right? Rights of data subject, we can get into that in a minute, all right? Also the right to access, that's missing off of here in terms of, oh, sorry, that's in data subject rights. Sorry, getting confused. Right, security is another data principle. So under Data Protection Act, if you were to ask, even an IT person, I challenge you guys to ask IT people this, and ask them, is there a cybersecurity law that we have in Barbados? And I bet most IT people tell you, no, there's no cybersecurity law. There's no IT security law. But that's not true. All right, there is a cybersecurity law, all right, and we may get into that in a little bit, right? But information has the right to be protected, it has the right to be available and accessible, and it has the right to be confidential, and it has the right to have integrity to information, so CIA, so confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality means only those people that should have access to it should have access to it. So the idea that I can store my medical records, or take, for example, a good example is government, Ministry of Health stores information, especially at the hospital, going back to things like vaccines and that sort of stuff, right? From time you're 5 all the way up to adulthood now with COVID. But it can be very confidential if some person off the street can just hit a button and log in and see my medical records. There's actually a no-no, right? Integrity means that information is accurate and is not changed, and the integrity of that information is intact. So if it's supposed to be $27 owed, right, that is only changed if it's supposed to be changed. So a classic example of integrity goes into cybersecurity again, because what if some person hacked into that server and changed the $27 I owed to $2,000 I owed? We can see where that problem goes. So most people think of data privacy in just ensuring that people's data remain private. There's also a cybersecurity component. So the A is availability. So look at the lawyers now. Whether the court cares if your server goes down or your files are in the cloud and you lose connectivity. Availability means that your data should be available to you when your data subjects requires it. Court does not care. If you have to turn for court, you go, oh, but sir, my servers were down and we have this problem, that problem. Under the Data Protection Act, under the cybersecurity section, it speaks of data availability and business resilience in big, bold terms, all right? International transfer, there are some situations where you should not be transferring data outside of Barbados without the consent of the data subject. So therefore, those people who send data overseas to get processed, especially if it's sensitive personal data, should be wary that in doing so, the Data Protection Act can apply. I wouldn't want to get into this right now. I just want to keep it light to a point, but this whole section needs discussion because right now we do things like Microsoft 365 and we have data all over the world. And if anyone was asked, where are my medical records or where my records are, most organizations can't tell in data subjects where their records are. It could be anywhere on any server, anywhere in the world. So this is a whole discussion, section 8 on international transfers of data that really needs to actually be ventilated because sometimes even data controllers, people who determine how information is to be processed, don't even know where the data is when they basically have contracts with processors. All right. So I'm going to skip this and go to rates to the subject. And in the interest of time, I'm going to end here because basically it's a time factor as well. It's now 11 o'clock. Always remember that personal data must be processed in accordance with the rights of data subject, which includes the following things: the rights of personal data, the rights of access to that personal data. Yeah, you can't have a record. This is HR again, so I'm speaking to HR people as well. You can't have HR files that employees don't know about. And this is an interesting thing. I know HR would like to keep records on employees that they deem are important, but you cannot have a record of an employee that employee doesn't know about. You can't be processing employee records because, and this is the thing, HR people might not recognize that employees are data subjects and the same rights and freedoms that a customer may have, such as access to that record, information on them, employees themselves are data subjects too. And the same record that you have on them, so they can have for themselves, and they have a right to see that record. They actually have a right to access and ask for that record and in an electronic form as well. All right. Unless, let me put the caveat there, unless it's an ongoing legal investigation where the court will determine if the employee can have access to that record. So I have to put that caveat in there because there's always caveats. But let's, for argument's sake, that it's an ongoing legal matter and a business goes to court and say, well, look, I do not want to give this particular employee this record, and this is my legitimate reason. You can apply to the court to have that injunction upheld, so the employee doesn't get that record. I don't know why would you not want an employee to get the record, but I'm just saying there are always caveats to these things. All right, to prevent processing late to cause distress or damage. Yeah. I'm going to use this as it's probably not an example I should use, but I'm going to use it anyway. Let's look at the trading card. If a person basically does not want to put certain information on that card because they feel that the information that's going to go on that card, because right now the trading card just has basic information where you live, basic stuff that government knows already through the Electronic Bonds Commission. but that card has a chip on it. That chip basically can store other information, other types of information. You have the right to not have that data processed if you feel it's going to put you in, it's going to damage you or put you in distress somehow. All right, because there's a right to not have your data processed as well. All right, and for businesses, and this is an interesting one. You know, you would see you would find that, for example, you go on a particular site or you go to a particular company, you fill out some information to apply for a card, and all of a sudden you're getting market information coming from that company or from other companies as well. You have a right to prevent direct marketing to yourself because you didn't ask for this information. And you can't, and companies can't bury it in tiny print. You know who's good at doing that? Banks. You go to apply for a credit card, and the information that they ask of you is in 16 point, 14 point, sometimes maybe 12 point. But your rights and the information you know that is legal information is in 9 point. I got you looking at it, peeny, trying to read this information because they put a whole book in the back of the application form for you to read. That's not fair. Certainly is not very transparent. When they want information from you, it is in 12 and 14 point. So you can read it easily so you don't misunderstand what they're asking. But when they want you to know what you're entitled to or what you're legally obligated to do or not do, right? They can put it in very, very tiny print. All right. So object to automated decision making. That falls under profiling, and it's more seen in the States, but it's coming here now too. Classic example. All the cameras that's going around, you know, there may come a day in government basically where, you know, the government decides, and it's been floated already as an idea, that all these cameras, government may want to be able to use it to maintain law and order. And then those systems, I saw it work in China myself, right? Where there was a packed area, and through image recognition, they were able to pick out an individual in a crowd, and the police was able to capture them in 5 minutes after a robbery. Because he thought he was smart. He was going to run away and hide in the crowd, but the cameras to pick out that person. That goes on in automated processing though. Because the difference is, and you can see it, and a lot of Black people complaining for it, identification of white people, the engine is fine-tuned. But when it comes to Black people, it seems the engine is not as fine-tuned, and it cannot sometimes distinguish our subtleties in who we are in terms of our skin. So therefore, we can have automated decision-making problems if we buy in wholeheartedly to these systems. Because imagine if we take that example to the Barbados level. The government decides to invest in this camera technology that can basically concatenate all the cameras around Barbados in public spaces. We're not talking the ones in your home, but all the cameras in public spaces. And they said to use the software that can't distinguish Black people too good, can't figure it out too good. All of a sudden, it says, it's me. I will not have to prove that it wasn't me. I want to go back to the young lady that says, this was the guy that was the peeping Tom in my home. And that was an individual. Think about it. That was an individual could not differentiate too well on a camera if it was the person that was her assailant or it was somebody else. Imagine software now that is not perfect, making automated decisions on yourself. To have inaccurate data rectified, blocked, or erased or destroyed speaks for itself. To claim compensation for damages caused by the breach of the Data Privacy Act, yes, you can get compensation if you feel that your rights and freedoms have been so hurt, attacked, that you deem compensation as the best course of action. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you. I think we're around the time. I would like to have a little discussion now. You know, any concerns you guys have, what you thought about the Data Privacy Act. This is not the full perspective of the act or the presentation. There are many other slides after this, but in the interest of time, I'm going to stop it there for questions. And I can always speak to anyone else after who would like to have the full presentation on the training session then. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams, for this very comprehensive and certainly very informative discussion that you so thoroughly went through with us over the last hour. As you rightfully said, this is the question and answer segment. And I would invite persons, if you do have a question or a comment, to either raise your hands or you can place it in the chat. The chat is being monitored by myself and my colleague, and we would certainly be happy to ask those questions and get the answers from Mr. Williams. We do have some questions already in the chat, and I will begin with one by Mr. Clark, which says, is there a checklist or list of best practices for businesses to refer to in order to know their responsibilities under the Data Protection Act?
Short answer, no, but there are best practices. What if it's a part of the I would say issue? The government did what's the best way to put it? The government did a regulation act. So under acts are the broad-based, I guess, instructions for how things are governed in terms of the law of the land. Regulations now speak to what Shannon is talking about, which is the operating standards for the act. There's no regulation to the Data Protection Act. However, this act is a regulation act, meaning that there are many aspects to this act that speaks to some aspects of regulation, such as the cybersecurity bit, right? If you look at the particular section concerning cybersecurity, you will see what is required, and then the act speaks to best practices. And all you have to do is to basically, I think it's about best practices change. Best practices for cybersecurity 10 years ago is not best practices now. And to even put that in regulation, to say that this is what is needed to be done, is a false sense of compliance and security. So I would state that regulations to this act would speak to the practitioners, the people who are responsible for compliance to the act should remain current in the market. So if you're responsible for compliance, you may not be a cybersecurity expert or a cybersecurity professional, but if you're going to take up compliance with the Data Protection Act, keeping current, being part of data privacy organizations and basically being part of that community would then feed into the type of checklist that you're talking about. And from there, your best practices become your best practices. But understand that once you stay current with those organizations, you then have best practices that are world standard.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Williams. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Clark. Okay. We do have another question. You were talking about you need to protect data and about best practices. Could you elaborate for us or explain to us what are some of the fair information practices? Because we did say, data protection is important, and then there can be some discrepancies along the way. Outline for us what are some of the fair information practices that we should be looking out for as consumers, certainly, and as businesses.
Okay. All right. So a fair practice would be most organizations or a lot of organizations take information up front. So to engage a new customer, you usually make them fill out an application form. A best example of that is a medical office, a doctor's office. So it's not fair for me to fill out a medical form and then you not tell me what are your data privacy practices. You can have it, a little notice at the door, we collect medical information and you're directed to speak to the administrator for your rights. That's fair. You can have it at the back of the application form. That's the best place to put it. So therefore, when they fill out that form, they can read it and say, well, your information is collected by, and it's only read by those medical practitioners needed to actually examine you or to render service, blah, blah, blah. All right, yada, yada. All right, so each organization will have a specific set of data privacy practices that are specific to their workflow and to their industry. So the industry practices associated with medical would not be the same thing for financial institution. So fair practices change, but the general ones speak to when you collect information, before you accept the information collected, that you give the data subject the right to understand what rights they have under the Data Protection Act that speaks to that specific business and industry. Another one could simply be that you have, for example, CCTV cameras. A lot of people don't realize that cameras don't keep within the boundaries themselves. But you may record people and people are going to realize it recording them. So if you know a nice practice that to show you what I'm talking about is if you call certain key organizations, I think in National Petroleum Corporation is one. I keep using them as an example because I hate to call the cliche ones like electric company or cable wireless. But you call those ones you hear, this call is recorded for quality assurance purposes. It's not quality assurance anymore, It's actually a requirement because when they record you, they must let you know up front before the operator comes on that this call is being recorded. Even this session right now, if you think about it, remember, and the guest on this call, it says this call is being recorded, right? And if you cancel or okay, you get kicked out. So if you don't agree to this call that we're on right now being recorded, you're kicked off. It's not like you disagree and can stay on the call. You're kicked off because if you don't agree to being recorded, right, then Zoom has a problem because Zoom does not know what the Barbados Coalition Service Agencies will do with this. So even for the BCSI and recording such as this, it may want to have a policy in the future concerning how it handles data. So I think a basic fair practice, and this is maybe the thread that goes across all, is have a basic data privacy practice that speaks to how you govern, use data, and who has access to it. Long-winded, but I think I did it justice.
No, you certainly, you absolutely did. And I just want to say thank you for putting it in the public sphere about developing that data policy, because certainly we'll be reaching back out to you so that we can partner on developing a comprehensive policy for the BCSI. So thank you. We have another question which says, what does the full training involve and how can we enroll in it? So this is really the full training that you would have mentioned initially, that this is just a part of a larger training component. So how can persons who are interested enroll?
What I normally do first, like I have training today, this afternoon. I normally go into a company and assess a few basics. So it's not a data privacy impact assessment, but it is a data practice observation. So it involves at least a couple hours of data practice observation. So for example, do you have antivirus on your system, and who has access to basic data? Does everyone in your organization have the same level of access? Some basic questions, right? Because at the end of the day, data has tiers of access, and that's a basic component. So it starts with a basic review of the company, because what that does, it helps me to tailor the 2-hour session and question and answer that would go towards that particular training session being more relevant to the organization. So there are different components, like for example, if you want to do a component that features developing a privacy policy, that's a breakout session, like a workshop. So you may say, Stephen, okay, I just want the training, but let's look at the workshop and let's look at the policies later, right? And that's a workshop where we look at the organization, how it gathers information, how it seeks to store information, and then the workshop will then look at, okay, so we don't even know where our information is. Ooh, so therefore that's a gap analysis to state, let's find out where your information is stored. Is it secure enough? Do we need to put it in a policy that we're going to improve these things? Have some sort of tip, for example, roadmap to get to a best practice and best place. So where I say training, is also a consultancy that the core component is training. Because if, for example, God forbid, you were to ever find yourself in a breach, the first thing the data commissioner should ask, I can't speak to the data commissioner's office, but the first thing they would ask, has your staff been trained? Because you would find that trained staff, even though you may not have these policies in place, can protect the worst outcomes if they know what to look for. So forget having a privacy policy, forget having these things which are critical, yes, but well-trained staff can protect the organization from the majority of missteps and breaches if they know what to look for. So it's about, I've got half an hour, 3 hours training and about 3 hours consulting. And I normally get them into trying to be more relevant to your organization, and it involves a data breach assessment. I have a partnership overseas where it takes your organization and scans it to see if it has had any breached emails or breaches associated with your record or your email access being online. So a classic example of that is a lot of, during COVID, a lot of people rushed and signed up for a site called Go Nitro. Go Nitro is a platform that allowed workflow during COVID. So if you had a path to get a check signed, and it was difficult to document your workflow to get checks or organizations information move freely within the organization because you're all working from home. Go Nitro provided a platform for that level of workflow governance. But not many people realize that Go Nitro got hacked. And all of the email addresses and passwords associated with Go Nitro got hacked, meaning that whoever had access to Go Nitro in terms of the hackers theoretically had access to your network. And you think about it is, a lot of people use Go Nitro for confidential documents that need to be digitally signed. So a lot of Barbadians in 2020, late 2020, didn't realize that their business were exposed and it was a very serious risk. So yeah, it isn't easy. So the whole thing that I do is a comprehensive assessment of, or at least a cursory assessment. It doesn't get comprehensive if you want it to be, but a cursory assessment followed by the training specific to your company. And then that is, you're given a certificate of awareness after by me. So it's a certificate program as well.
Thank you very much. And I will encourage you, Mr. William, to share the information with us when you have your next iteration of training going on, so that we can certainly allow our members to know in case anyone is interested in participating. We do have a final question, and we have two questions. It's a two-pronged. Okay, so we have another question coming in. Let me ask this question first. It's a two-pronged question where someone has asked, what are some of the most important technologies to be used when dealing with data privacy? And also, as you're aware, many of us do online shopping, and more not on the business side, but a more of a individual level. And the question has asked that, therefore, what are some of the challenges that people face when trying to protect their online privacy?
Okay, I would say the technologies that I would recommend is a rated, I can use the word highly rated antivirus program. Antivirus programs have gotten pretty sophisticated now that they have a cloud-based component that keeps it pretty much up to date. And it's part of a global chain where if one country has identified a risk or a threat, and that company that you're using antivirus from recognizes that it can patch that threat and push the signature or push the behavioral analysis that will help protect your organization to it, I would think you want a connected antivirus now. So that's the first thing. The second one I would also put in terms of technology is something called a UTM, or a next generation firewall. Not just firewall, but it does a couple of things. You're looking for something called data leak protection, right? And data leak means, just like what it sounds, that you are notified if data of a certain, I guess, fingerprint or certain structure. So take, for example, I'm probably using the words wrong, but let me say structure. Take, for example, suppose you realize that, and this is a thing too, a lot of companies don't have naming conventions. But let's go back to a doctor's office. Suppose you decide to name all of your patient records, patient, right? Patient, first initial, last initial, and the date. So suppose you decide that that is your naming convention for all of your medical records. Then you could put in a next generation firewall, or something called a unified threat management firewall, that anytime a file with this signature, name is signature, asks for permission to leave your network through the firewall, because set up correctly, all data has to go through a firewall to get outside into the world, sees this, and it has not come from an authorized source, meaning that the person that could send data to the company is only the doctor, then it blocks it or tags it. So a large organization like the hospital should have a naming convention. You may have some person sending data that is outside the norm that would do it. You don't want to block an employee that may be filling in for someone else for a week or so from their job. So you may tag the record. And tagging means that it just notifies management, IT management, that this record was left the organization by this person, and then they can use it for investigative purposes after. So I'm saying a very good antivirus and a type of firewall that has something called data leak protection. So those are two critical things that I would think would be the technology that you want to look for. There are others, but remember, we're still talking about a country that has a limited budget. And at the end of the day, we are not all Goddards, and we're not all large companies that have thousands of dollars in budget. So those two key technologies there can do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Protect yourself online. I would state, unless you're tech savvy or you have a discerning eye, I would say stick to companies that have an online reputation. And what I mean by online reputation, you can get probably 70% of what you want from Amazon. I'm not saying shop at Amazon only, but someone said this morning, I smiled because it makes it bad for small businesses, but she says she only buy high-end because she's a leader of a particular institution, right? She says she only buys technology from companies that she can sue. A little unfair to small businesses. And I smile because, I'm a small business too. So therefore, how do you do business with those organizations that don't have a reputation like Amazon? And a simple thing would be just to Google them. A lot of people don't realize that people's experiences are no part of the global ecosystem. So if I give bad service, and you can see it on what's the one people use for hotel industry again? Oh gosh, just have a bad experience in Barbados, you find it here quick enough. But if it's something I can't remember. It kind of tells people how the hotel experience has been. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But if you search on Barbados and experiences or a particular company, you will find it more often than not, the experiences and the rating of that company comes to the top, because Google is that smart. Google is your friend when you want to start to gather information and make a decision on your spending patterns. But if you can't, if you don't want the headache, just shop where you know. Basic things would be, I would tell anyone, and I said this in a presentation I did for CBC, most people now can have 2 credit cards or 2 Visa cards. You should have a Visa credit and a Visa debit. So I said for dirty locations you don't verify, you sure if you want to do business with them, use a Visa debit and leave a little bit of money on the Visa card, that if they go and try to snatch more than what's there, right, they ain't getting more. Like for me, I have a Visa card. I put only money that I know I can afford to lose, or even if, the $50 go, well, I can cry, $50 gone, but we eat $50 in food. I don't even know what we do with $50 at the end of the day. Banks will tell you different. Banks will say, no, Stephen, do it out of payroll. Use your credit card. But here's the problem. You gotta wait until the bank verifies this transaction fraudulent. You gotta wait, and there's a lot of headache to get your situation reversed. If you depend on your credit card, especially as part of your monthly operating structure, a lot of people live by credit card now, paying it off in short terms, doing XYZ, building up the points or whatever. You gotta wait till the bank verifies the credit card facing a fraudulent charge, right? That they gotta reverse. That don't happen overnight. Not gonna happen in 3 days. May never happen in a week. So I say that you can have a Visa debit, that if you know you want to do a specific thing with a specific business, only that money is no charge by the bank for you to put exact money on that Visa debit. The money gets spent the way you're supposed to get spent. You put zero money on it again until you need it. And if they get that card, if the suckers get the card online, there ain't nothing much you can do with it because no money there. There's no credit there for them to pull from or to use, or for the bank to go, oh, this was a fraudulent charge. Oh, let me reverse it. Yep. All right, that's my thinking behind it.
Okay, thank you so very much for that. And our final question is, what happens to the files of former employees? Should they be destroyed? Just clarification on a point you made earlier.
Okay, good. That's a very, very good question, because it's not simple, and that's why policies should be there. And let me say that when it comes to former employees, this is where it's something called a data governance committee, right? organizations that of a certain size, I think that once you hit more than 50 employees, you should have something called a data governance committee. That data governance committee determines, right, and HR will be in that committee, IT will be in that committee, compliance or a consultant lawyer will be in that committee, the CEO will be in that committee. Now, why what you're saying is critical is this. A 50-person company will have, in the stretch of, say, 10 years, hundreds of past employees. My little small business, right now, been operating now for over 20 years, right? And I can tell you had about maybe 500 to 1,000 people that passed through my small company. And we have 10 people, right? But over a period of time, and we have all these records. So the policy would state that we will destroy after 1 year of disassociation. So if you think about it, I decide to resign today. I may come back for some record, for example, some people want slips, their employee slips, some people may want certain information on them. So a policy would state that after a year, we will destroy any person identified information that is not pertaining to the financial requirements or legal requirements that government has placed on us. So all the HR type stuff, right, in terms of the record, in terms of their experience at the organization, whatever components of HR record takes, you can state that your policy can state you can keep it a year, 2 years up front. The thing is to be transparent. If your employee knows that you keep the record for 2 years, they would expect that after 2 years, you write them and state, Mr. Williams, being that this is the 2-year anniversary of the date you left, we just inform you that your records pertaining to this information, and have information categorized. So behavior, credit, not credit score, what is it called? Appraisal, all these things will be destroyed. All right. And what about all those applications companies receive? That's personal data too. Because what people send is their transcripts from universities. They send their address, they send an email address. Some send very personal information of their connections with other people. So HR is a very serious component to data privacy. All of those records must be destroyed at the end of the policy. Now, you can't have a policy that states we keep your records ever, never, amen. Why? So why you keep a record on me for 25 years? First of all, you should keep a record on me for longer than 7 years if I'm no longer an employee. And that includes financial records. So there must be a data purging or data deletion policy that goes into a organization's record management and governance. Because after 7 years, I have no connection to that organization as an employee ever, right? Then it should be deleted. Now it gets tricky. Sometimes employees themselves too are customers. And then you have to know how somebody have separate databases because it kind of crosses the stream. So that's why you need a data governance committee, because the data governance committee will look at all the permutations of what data is kept and determine policy for each data circumstance. That's why I say if you're bigger than 50 employees, right, especially if you're over 100, if you hit 100, man, you got to go to the data governance committee. Because now you have hundreds of records to even start. Why? Because HR, and most organizations over 100 people have an HR officer at least, now gets thousands of applications per year. I don't know one company in Barbados that has hundreds of employees that don't get hundreds of applications, job applications a year. And that does not even include the HR files associated with the staff and then past staff members. So HR must be part of a data governance committee. And those are sort of things data governance committee should occupy their time with. Or part of their time anyway. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I am sure that those who are participating in today's conversation, those who are watching us live on YouTube, and those who will see this after will certainly agree with me, Mr. Williams, when I say thank you for this very informative and most comprehensive discussion today. I feel as though I am certainly way more informed about data privacy and data protection than I was an hour and a half ago. I am very pleased that you took the time certainly to do this for us. And as one of the participants have said, it was a great session, lots of food for thought, and they certainly thank you as well as the BCSI for today's conversation. With that, I just want to let everyone know, thank you for attending. This would not have been the same without your participation and certainly your attendance. But I also want to invite you to continue participating in BCSI's week of activities. Tomorrow, we continue with 3 mini workshops right here at the BCSI office located at the Manor Lodge complex on Lodge Hill, St. Michael. We will be having a workshop on entrepreneurship, turning your passion into profit. We will also have one on consulting. If you're interested in being a consultant, we don't know where to start, come and join us tomorrow. And we will also have a workshop, on event planning. Now, each of these sessions are just $25 per person. We invite you to contact us if you have not yet registered, but you certainly want to register. There's still some space available, so please feel free to reach out to us at telephone number 429-5357 or sending us an email, and we will certainly get the details to you. On Thursday is our annual general meeting. This meeting is just for our members. So those of you on the call who are members of BCSI, you have not yet registered to come to the AGM, please do so. We look forward to seeing all of you as we share the BCSI's business with you. And certainly we engage in voting for the new BCSI's board. And finally, this is where all can participate, and we are all extending an invitation to all of you to join us on Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Cosmo Club for the BCSI's networking mingle. We will close this week of activities with that mingle, and we're certainly looking forward to seeing all of you at Cosmo Club. Again, call us to RSVP, and we are certainly extending an invitation to each of you to join us. I want at this time to tell you once again, thank you for joining. And on behalf of BCSI's Board of Directors, our Executive Director, and certainly the entire staff, we want to wish you an enjoyable rest of the day. And we look forward to seeing you all at our activities throughout the week. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.